Howdy. For this video, we're going to be looking at some more modules. I've already switched my party to Foundry, and I've already hosted 2 sessions so far, I believe. It's been going pretty well so far. Everyone seems to be enjoying the switch. But for this first video, I'm going to start kind of breaking down all the modules that I'm using to actually run my game. So starting up, so we're going to look at our manual. So this one's all going to be about time. So first module we're going to look at is about time, followed by the calendar weather, in addition to the minimal calendar and weather module, and also times up. So for this one, I don't have times up active right now, but I'll activate it here in a minute so you can at least see. So for about time, it will create a way to keep up with timed effects. So whenever you have a character that has a effect that does have a time limit on it, so a good example would be a person who's using rage. So the rage itself is only lasts 60 seconds. So I typically don't. My biggest reason why I don't use times up is because unfortunately combat never lasts exactly 60 seconds. So everybody's turn, one person's turn might last about a minute, another person might last 2 minutes, depending on what's going on. They might ask questions about what, situation. If I jump up on this, will I get any kind of advantage or anything like that? And everything's different. Every situation's different. So I don't make certain features and effects have a set time limit, because when you do that, it will it can really mess things up. So I actually went through and I went on one of the wiki pages for D&D, and I looked up a calendar year. These were all of the months. One of the calendars I looked up, it had listed all of these months. It's a 366-day calendar year, much like our own. And these were the 12 months starting in the equivalent of January, which would be Hammer, and then to December, which is like Nightal. My current campaign actually takes place in the spring, which is actually important for Waterdeep Dragon Heist. So a lot of our things is the Spring Madness section. So us being in the Tarska does actually matter. Also, I looked up kind of a general idea, and it was based on the Wizards of the Coast, and when they say that in lore the Waterdeep Dragon Heist takes place, they said it took place in 1492 DR. So that's what I set mine to, just to kind of keep the flow of it. And then the days of the week are starting with Sunday, Moon Day, Star Day, Earth Day, Mount Day, Leaf Day, and Sky Day. You can really go as crazy in depth of creating holidays. I did not, but you very easily could. A prime example of that would be, especially in particular for Waterdeep Dragon Heist, is there are a way to actually have. I want to say it's, I think, put under miscellaneous. I want to say it's under this one. It's under the campaign tracker. Uh, Trying to keep this. Yeah. So right here in the middle here, you actually have Waterdeep holidays that you can actually incorporate into your story if you really want to. I didn't want to. Ours was almost finished, so I didn't really feel like it was going to be really necessary to do it. But especially once we'd switched to uh, Foundry, we were already almost completed with the campaign, so I didn't really waste time doing that. But I at least set up the month. So when I use the minimal one, is what creates it this kind of minimized like this, so you don't actually see the clock, which can sometimes be good and sometimes can be bad. It just depends on how you're running it. If you're being really strict in time, and moving from area A to area B takes 5 hours, then you can manage that. If you go through the setting menu right here, do I have it opened up somewhere else? Oh yeah, I do. I had it open up at the top. Didn't see it. Didn't see it. Then you can adjust the time. So if they say they moved from area A to area B and it took them 5 hours, then you can say, okay, it's been 5 hours since then. But when you have the minimal one turned off, you'll actually see the full clock. I don't mind not seeing the clock, so it doesn't really bother me all that much. So I don't, I usually try to save as much space as I can in the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, especially because once everybody's on and logged in, the menu over here gets really tall, and so I typically try to not have it up, so that way it's one less thing that's distracting me. So what I'll typically do is once I have, the uh, calendar map, which it took it off for some reason. Don't know why. It took calendar weather off. Okay, and then save modules. When I deactivated the minimal one, it automatically deactivated the regular one as well. Yep. Okay. So now you'll see the full clock, which you can actually create a running timer. So as soon as you push play in this, it will actually run in real time, and you'll notice, it'll create a nice little running clock. And so if time progresses and you have certain effects activated and you actually have them on set times, you could say progress time by a minute. If you have hour-long effects, you can progress times by an hour. You can advance the dynamic lighting with this. I believe there is a way you can link the two of them. I have not personally done it, but there's a way that you can link the dynamic lighting to there's the global illumination effects that allow you to have the dawn, the daylight, dusk, and then darkness to incorporate the different times of day. So you'll have your dusk, which is your early morning. Sun's still in the process of coming up. You might actually have street lights and everything in effect still, where it's not completely dark outside yet, but it's still there's still a little bit of light outside. And then when you progress to daylight, then if you have lighting effects like that, and if you set up the darkness threshold, then it'll automatically turn them off. And then as you get into the dusk time, sorry, I meant to say dawn, and then when you get to dusk, then it progresses to a darker scale, and then you can see it has kind of a orange yellow hue to it to incorporate the difference in changing in lighting, and then you can get to nighttime, and then it'll progress to go even darker. And he's a half elf, so he's got 6 feet of dim vision, so he can actually see pretty well in the light here. I also tried something very new with this map in terms of drawing my map and drawing it so that you can see the buildings a little bit better. One thing that I always didn't like, and one thing that I don't like even on my Troll Skull Alley map, because it's such a large map and there's so many buildings, you don't really get the scale of seeing the buildings, because the way the maps are drawn, the way I drew the maps, I just drew them as big squares and cut everything out so you can only see what's visible. But with this one, I tried something a little different, and everybody seemed to like it. When I asked, like, how did y'all like the view of the buildings and everything with me changing it up, and they all seemed to like it because it kind of gave it extra depth and more kind of a good top-down feel to it. So pretty much what I did to create this kind of effect with, you can still see the buildings even though it still has the line of sight blocking it, and and realistically when you get to certain areas you're not going to be able to see past them. So what I did for that was I went through every building, and at the top I pretty much drew just regular walls, just the regular standard walls here on the outside. And then at the very front of the walls, instead of drawing another wall, I did an invisible wall that you would do for like a window or something. So that way you can still see through it, but when you get to certain sides and angles, you can't see past it. So it creates, a good kind of depth where when you're standing on this side, you can't see past the building, and when you come around, you can at least see the building, but you can't really go like through the building unless you physically move them, drag them onto it. You'll have like ones where they can kind of like step to it, but just depending on where the token lands. But for the most part, it prevents them from going past it, and it creates a really nice effect of being able to give a little bit of extra depth. But enough going off tangent. So with the times up module, I've had mixed reactions with it. So I don't always use it because I don't like how it sometimes creates an effect that will vanish. So the issue I've had with times up, and it does work. It works really well. So I will do we'll do 360 seconds, and I'll just create a random effect. Let's just increase his movement speed by 20 for however long this is going to be. So we'll do this. We'll do times up test. Okay, so times up test, 360 seconds. And have it actually set up for that. It's just going to add his movement speed by 20, and we'll do that. So it's going to last the equivalent of an hour. So I have times up, his movement now speed changed to 60. If I toggle the effect, you'll see it switch back to 40, switch it back on. So when I have times up, so let me reactivate times up. Once it's active, it works with dynamic active effects to realize there's an effect on, and you'll even see the icon here where it shows the icon of his effect that he has going on will show that it's active, and it'll show its duration, and it should in theory remove after an hour. So we have an hour. We'll skip 1 single minute. So is it now we got 12:05, and then we will skip an hour, and so look for the effect. We'll put them side by side so you can clearly see when the second I hit an hour, it should remove the effect. So hour passes, effect's still there. So that's the issue I've had with times up. So it doesn't always remove the effect the way you want it to. So say if I do the same thing where I have the effect time, so I want to do start time would be 2:06:00 for my start time. When I actually let's set it back to another minute. Whoops, wrong one. We'll do times up test. So and then see, even when I change the time, it threw it all off. So I'm not personally a big fan of the times up test, or the times up effect in the module. I haven't played around with it enough to get it to work effectively. Even in a lot of my testing with it, I mean, it does pretty much like what it's doing now. It works almost never. I've noticed that even if you just create like a simple effect that is just as simple of ending it in 60 seconds, and we'll just do let's do something that you can see a change. Let's see, where's it going to go? We got max. Let's see. Attributes HP. We'll add. So his current health is 69. So let's add 100. So that way you can really notice a change. So which it's already disappeared. I guess that wasn't a good example of one. Let's create another one, and then we'll do test. Duration will be 1 minute, or sorry, we'll do 60 seconds because you have to do everything in seconds, and then we'll just do the movement speed again because that's at least a decent one to show. Movement walk, and we'll add 100, and then add. Okay, so now he's got 140 movement. It's lasted for 60 seconds. You do it for a minute, it turns it off. So it already removed the effect. So you don't have to use the about time to do that. I've tested it with doing it without using about time and using about time. But the only bad thing is with times up, not about time. My apologies. So with times up, so I don't I don't really use it, especially because a lot of those effects are usually dependent on like single turns or not single or depending on the effect, it might be a single turn effect, it might be multiple turns, but it's an effect that's going to constantly use over and over again. So with Rage, my particular barbarian is a totem barbarian in my group who has a ton of effects. So this is not quick for me to load and turn on and off fast. It takes me forever. To make this one skill takes me a while. So I had it disappear one time in the middle of a game, and I was so angry because I had to go back and fix it in the middle of the session. And afterwards, I pretty much created it and then left it in. I've created a bunch of little items or anything during the game, and I'll throw it in here. That way I can have access to it again. So I have another player who uses Shadow Blade a lot as a weapon. That's one of his primary ways of attacking. And so I basically created the effect of a Shadow Blade. Instead of using it as a spell, I actually created it as a sword just because it was just an effect that was just really hard to take on and off. Um, Same thing with like making like magic items stuff like that. Some of them will have effects that are temporary. Some will have effects that will recharge over and over again. So for certain things, I just make them effects that are just you just turn them on and off to make them inactive or turn them on and off. Same thing with like reckless attack. He likes to reckless attack a lot, so he doesn't care if people getting advantage against him. So he'll activate it in the background and it'll turn on and off that way. One thing I have noticed though is that there are certain effects and certain things that don't mesh well together. So one thing that I've learned and I found out in testing was unarmored defense does not mesh well with other dynamic active effects because they kind of compete for they compete for the result. So unarmored defense, you upgrade your AC is based on your Dex and your Con modifier. So in doing so, his Dex isn't that super high and his Cons is okay. So his AC is only 15. But what I was doing, because I started to have a player that started like to cast haste on people, and so when he does that, I ended up creating a condition for haste because it was the easiest way to incorporate it. So when say a person has like good example, so their AC is 17, when they have the haste effect on, it will increase their AC, increase their movement speed, and give them all the effects that they would get from the ability of haste, which I did that through the condition lab. I made a condition for haste. I did the ones I've done so far. I've done bless, haste, bark skin, fly, just a dead status effect so that I could do loot, and then mage armor. Mage armor is great for enemies because especially when you have mage enemies, that's to turn the effect on and off. Having mage armor that you can just click an effect for an enemy works wonders because it doesn't always calculate it for certain enemies. So like I had one where I had this guy who was a halfling, and his AC is only 12, and he casts mage armor. So for him, second I do mage armor, bumped his AC up to 15. So that make this NPC last a little bit longer depending on the situation. And it's simple as me just turning the effect on and off, and they can clearly see the effect on him when I do that. Because even if you say you could right click it and throw mage armor on his face if you really wanted them not to miss it, and create like a really large icon, which I typically just always just use the little mini one just because there's no point in that. They can usually clearly see the effect, and I've gone over with all of my party of the effects and stuff that they get with ones like that. I've also been experimenting with creating loot sheets after an enemy dies. I had some issues with it though, unfortunately, where I could create it and I would make it, but then when my players tried to access it, they couldn't access it. And so I would have to give the players complete permission to use the character to be able to get them to pick up the loot. So that was a little inconvenient, but I still got to play around with it a little bit. I saw the idea in another video, and I at least tried it out just kind of on a whim. And I mean, in theory it works great, but it didn't actually work great in practice, unfortunately. And pretty much what I did was, prior to creating characters in loot, is I went through every single character and every potential creature that they would run into, especially that session that we held, and created any kind of enemy that might drop something. So they ran into a bunch of kobolds. So what I did was is I went through the loot sheet and I gave each of the kobolds just a tiny bit of money, just for whatever thing they were gonna do, and I created the items because I gave him a dagger, a sling, and then just 15 sling bullets. And if afterwards, whenever they killed the creature, if they wanted to loot them, they could. And so, like an example, so like say this guy runs up and he attacks and kills this kobold and easily murders him. So now he's murdered, but I, as the DM, can pull him up and can easily see this. And then this is how his loot sheet would look: is he would have, 5 silver pieces, 12 coppers on him. He would have a dagger and a sling, and then at least 15 sling bullets on him. And then, if I try to split it, it won't. It won't let me split it to the party. It'll throw up an error when there's players on because I'm not any of the player characters, and so it won't let me divvy it up to them. So I was having to like hand put every amount in. So every time they kill something, I was having to just keep a running log of how much money I had to give everybody, and then do it that way. And it was really inconvenient. So I gotta play around with it and test a little bit more. But went super off tangent from time. But I really do like the about time. You can set everything up so like you can do 6 seconds as a single combat round. So when they're in combat, it will keep up with it. The calendar is pretty cool because you can if you like 24-hour military time, then you can set it up like that. If you use Celsius, if you're not in America and you're using pretty much everywhere that's not the U.S. that uses the metric system in Celsius, and you can use that. But I haven't really had a lot of luck with the times up module personally, so I'm just gonna have to keep playing around with it a little bit. I mean, I've been messing with Foundry for about 2 or 3 months now, but my party's only been messing with it for like 2 sessions, so I got with pretty much everybody prior to starting just so they could kind of play around with it and get a feel for it. But everyone seems to enjoy it so far. But that should just about do it with enough of me rambling, going on completely off topic. I'll try to create another video over some other things here in just a minute. And but in the meantime, y'all have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.